I'm Dana Han-Klein here with Rupert Everett for The Happy Prince.
What do you admire most about Oscar Wilde?
His tenacity, his possibility of making the most of a bad deck of cards, his ability in exile and in defeat not to be a victim, the retention of his sense of humor on the gallows, so to speak, his curiosity about people, his empathy unimpaired by punishment and torture, and basically his spirit in exile and in the gutter, I find magnificent.
Logistically or emotionally, what was the most challenging scene?
Logistically, I think we did a big scene in a café concert where I sing on the table. And there were so many elements to that scene: a lady singing on stage, a crowd dancing, an orchestra, a fight, a song to play back, all in one day. Normally you take 3 or 4 days to do a scene like that. And so that was logistically our biggest challenge. Emotionally, dying, is a challenge, because obviously until you have died, you don't know quite. It's a grey area.
You can't really go method on that one.
It's something you have to guess at, and so quite often you feel a little bit that you're not giving everything. Well, because giving everything would make it into a snuff movie, I suppose. But I suppose dying, is a difficult thing. Dying and then getting up and having to scream at somebody off camera because something's gone wrong. That's and then going back to dying was challenging emotionally.
That leads me to, what is the hardest part about directing yourself?
Well, I was very lucky in one sense. First of all, because the whole journey of the film meant that I'd played Oscar Wilde in The Judas Kiss, a play by David Hare. I felt I'd tried and tested the character a lot in the theatre, over a year and a half almost of acting. And so it wasn't like I was jumping into the film as an actor with no preparation, which we often do. You just go to a first day and you do it. So I knew as an actor what I was doing, and I didn't, as a director, have to worry about me in that sense as an actor. I knew the character. I'd had so much time over the 10 years it took to get the film off the ground, looking at the scenes, wondering if they were good enough, maybe I should change this or something, that I knew the part very, very well. So in that sense, I think I was very, very lucky as the actor being directed by me. I think if I'd managed to direct the film straight after I'd written it, it would have been a different issue, and much harder and more complicated, probably.
Do you think you're ever going to get tired of Oscar Wilde? Because obviously, you played him on stage, you played his roles in theater and then in film.
Yeah, I think we're going to say goodbye to each other now for a bit. Although there's obviously things I'd like to revisit at a certain point. But yeah, I'd like to move on to fresh pastures now.
If Oscar Wilde himself saw the film, what would you want him to say to you after?
Oh, well, I want him to say, God, how did you know that it was like that?
Yep, that's pretty good. This is a weird. Do you feel like you're now have to be a scholar of Wilde, or you just sort of osmosis, which is not a verb?
I think I am a scholar of Wilde in one sense. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff about him, and I feel fairly certain that my view of him is a correct one, and it's backed up by facts. Yes, I feel I know him inside out in a way.
What do you think he would say about the age of social media that we live in?
These questions are very, very difficult, because he is so much like we are part of our era. Mm-hmm. He's so much part of his era. To take him out of it would mean he wasn't. To take him out of it would mean he wasn't any longer him. I think it's just impossible. He really exists only in that period, the late 19th century, and in our period, he's, I don't know, how would those people deal with cars driving along? I mean, everything would be such a shock. I don't think they'd know. I think they'd go into kind of seizure at the noise.
For me, the genesis of the question is that Dorian Gray is like one of my favorite, and I'm like, what would he think of like Instagram and Snapchat? Do you think that Oscar Wilde would be happy with how he's been remembered, and how would you like to be remembered?
I think Oscar Wilde wanted to be remembered and wanted to be endlessly relevant, and managed to achieve it in some very peculiar way. He seems to have a relationship with all the eras so far. I think he has a lot to say to today, because after all, it's important for us to remember that the Oscar Wilde experience, as seen in this film, for example, is really only halfway across the spectrum of today's global gay, lesbian, transgender experience, which is quite a shock. In some countries, it's very much a life and death challenge every day to live a gay, lesbian, or transgender existence, particularly transgender, well, particularly all of them actually, in some places. So I think it's a very, very good. He's again a character who's still in the middle of everything.
So how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I'd like to be remembered as a local oddity.
If you could go back 10 years and give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say?
10 years?
10 years, so the beginning gestation period of this film, potentially.
Not 10 years, I wouldn't give him, if I'd have gone back 20 years, I could have given myself some advice.
Which is?
Work harder.
Interesting. Do you feel you haven't worked hard?
Not then, I didn't. Okay. Not hard enough.
Interesting. Do you feel like you're making up for that now?
Yeah.
Do you want to keep on that trajectory, like writing, directing, acting, or?
If I can, but if I'd worked harder 20 years ago, it would all been much easier for me now.
Generally speaking, what inspires you?
People, life, watching, seeing what's going on, reading, movies, paintings, weather, the sea, trees, birds. Trees and birds I prefer to human beings, really, at the moment.
Can't blame you.
And flowers, all those kind of soppy things.
What frustrates you?
Virtual, social media, the virtual world, everything to do with computers, everything to do with iPhones, everything to do with what I see as the breakdown in communication between us all.
It's like it's the antithesis of Wilde, right? It's like, let me write you this beautiful prosaic letter. Here's what I ate for lunch today, right. And I'm sending this from the toilet. Right. What's a guilty pleasure of yours?
I don't have any more guilty pleasures anymore.
Enlightenment?
No, but I mean, all my pleasures they're not very guilty. No, I don't have any guilty pleasures. I used to.
How do you define success now, and how has that changed from earlier in your career?
I think I still define it in the same way. Success is a dangerous thing, funnily enough, and I think the grappling and elbowing one's way towards success is also one of the unattractive facets of our human condition. I think it's been bred into us as part of 20th century mythology that we need to be successful, and I think that we're paying an enormous price for that. And the crest of that wave is now our kind of X factor mentality. And I think the success is not everything that it looks like. And funnily enough, for me, failure has always been much more interesting, and much more fertilizing, and much more creative. Success is always where I lost track of myself.
Do you have an example of a failure that's been?
Just always going back to square one, things not working out, forces you onto yourself. For example, if my career hadn't failed so dramatically in about 2004, 2005, I would never have started writing, and I'd never have written this film. I think because I've never really achieved that much success, I've always been forced to think on my feet more than other people maybe, and I think that's been great. So I don't know whether success is, obviously very seductive, but it's like drugs. The first line is nice, and then after that, it becomes neurotic.
Growing up, who was your favorite fictional character?
Oh, Mary Poppins.
Because?
Well, it was the first film I saw, and it was an earth-shattering experience, and I loved Mary Poppins very much. I still do.
What's one thing you wish you had more time for?
Well, coming from Los Angeles to San Francisco, I would love to have some time to drive in that weird mountain range north of Ojai before Napa.
Where do you hope to see LGBTQIA++ cinema in 10 years?
Would like to see, well, I don't know, but I'd like to see obviously more and more fabulous gay, lesbian, transgender subjective films. And there are some amazing ones already, especially in the Eastern Bloc, fantastic ones. I would like to see gay actors starring in straight roles, and transgender women starring as women, and not just as transgender, and gays not just as gays. And I'd like to be a wonderful mixture of everything, so that there was a kind of two-way traffic between straights and gays. I'm not against straights playing gay parts if the gays could have a chance at playing straight parts. I, of course, adored and felt very moved by Michael Douglas and what's he called? Matt Damon in Behind the Candelabra. I adored them in it, and wouldn't have missed it for anything. But equally, I would like for us to be doing the same thing on the other side.